Good morning. Good morning. We're going to get started with our sixth annual Fatherhood Conference. My name is Frank Williams. I am the Executive Director of the White Plains Youth Bureau and the chair of our New York State Fatherhood Conference. And we want to acknowledge all of you for taking time from your schedules to be with us this morning. Before we get started, I want to introduce Tom Kelly and Matt Sprigg, who are going to talk with us about some of the technical components of today's conference.
Yes, I'm Tom Kelly. It's been an honor to be asked to help with this conference. I'm really excited for it. We're going to try to bring the in-person elements into this a little bit. We're going to do that with questions after the presentations. There's going to be a keynote and 3 presentations. And during the presentations, if a question comes to your mind, just go down to the chat room, the chat box, and put the question in there. It'll come to the hosts, and we'll pick out a few of those questions to ask the presenters for the 5 minutes after they talk. You're going to be on mute. If you know, keep yourself on mute. We're going to kind of be monitoring the space. Obviously, there's stuff happens sometimes, but we're going to try to keep that out of it. Keep this nice and clean. And yeah, I think that's it. Just relax and enjoy the great presentations, and hope to see you. We're going to even introduce a little more elements, possibly in the 2 more of these in November and December. So we're going to use the technology to our advantage. So good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Again, we want to welcome you to our 6th annual Fatherhood Conference, brought to you by the New York State Fatherhood Conference Committee. Our committee is comprised of 18 community-based agencies, organizations. A special thanks is extended to Westchester County Executive George Latimer and his staff and his team, and the Westchester County Department of Social Services for their support under the leadership of Commissioner Kevin McGuire. Our focus is to put a spotlight on our fathers in terms of their status, their economic mobility, the family development, and the overall quality of their life. Our goal is to address the important issues related to fathers, how to make their lives better. Let me just say that again. Fathers are challenged in terms of employment, in terms of housing, in terms of their racial profiling, in terms of just living in a country where there are issues of unrest and social injustice. And so we as a committee, for 6 years, we've been trying to improve their lives by bringing resources, supports, and opportunities, and by bringing stakeholders together to discuss these important issues. Our conference is divided into 3 sessions. The first session is today, and we welcome Dr. Franklin Richardson. And then we have another session on Saturday, November 7th from 10 to 12. And our last session is on Saturday, December 5th from 10 to 12. And Mayor Andrew Rainey is the keynote speaker for that program. So we thank you for being here. We look for your participation, feedback, and your involvement in helping us to improve the outcomes of our fathers. At this time, we're going to hear a message from County Executive George Latimer.
Hi, I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and I want to extend a warm welcome to all who are participating in the Westchester, New York Fathering Conference, a responsible father's lifeline during COVID-19. This is the 6th annual New York Fathering Conference, and of course it comes during the COVID-19 outbreak, which means that we're doing this virtually rather than in person. All of the various sessions that individuals can participate in, we think are going to be very, very helpful. And we have tremendous speakers, keynote speakers like the Reverend Dr. W. Franklin Richardson from Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon. We have James Rodriguez, Fathers and Family Coalition of America. We have Andre Rainey, the great mayor of the city of Peekskill, who will be speaking about these topics as well. As a father myself, I recognize that It's something that you have to learn how to be good at over the years, to be a good father, to raise your children during the early years of their life, and then to be a positive presence in their life during their adult years. And if we have the good fortune to have grandchildren, to go on to have grandchildren as well. So let me extend good wishes to all those who are participating in organizing the conference and those who are participating, and hopefully we'll all get something good out of it. And next year, we'll do this live and in person.
Thank you. Thank you, County Executive George Latimer. I'm not sure if Commissioner Kevin McGuire is present. I know that he will be joining us, but if not, we're going to go right into our program. We're going to hear from Deacon DeWitt Smith, who's going to introduce our speaker this morning. We're going to turn it over to Deacon DeWitt Roy Smith. Deacon Smith. So we're waiting on Deacon Smith. Just give him a moment and we'll see where we are with him.
Deacon Smith, you can unmute yourself.
Deacon Smith, are you there?
Hello, Frank.
Yes.
This is Commissioner McGuire.
Oh, okay. Commissioner McGuire is here. So we'll have Commissioner McGuire, who's going to bring us greetings and welcome. And following Commissioner McGuire, we'll hear from Deacon Smith.
Right. I think the deacon probably wanted to get on, but for up until about 30 seconds ago, everything was muted and you couldn't unmute yourself.
Okay.
So my apologies for not getting on. But, you know, notice that when you go forward, that you'll have people who are basically talking, but you won't hear them. I would just like to say at this point, welcome to everybody to the Fathering Conference. My name is Kevin McGuire. I'm the Commissioner of Social Services here in Westchester County. And I've been involved in fatherhood programs basically in 2 states. Before I was here in Westchester, I had started a fatherhood program in the state of Maryland, a statewide fatherhood program in the state of Maryland, working with a very special person by the name of Joe Jones, who runs the Center for Urban Families down in Baltimore. And we did a lot of good work and with fathers, and, you know, led me to understand that what we are doing and what we're trying to do is, you know, is really essential. I'm a father. And it is important. Fathers are very important in the lives, well, and everybody in the community. Your families are very important to you. They're really what it's all about. All we want to do with the Fathering Conference is to let men understand that you're not alone, that there are resources available to help you out, and that there's strategies that we can work together to do that. What I saw, you know, it's an interesting conference this year, obviously because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's really good to hear that there's at least 30 or 40 people who actually got to dial in on this dreary day to hear about this. And there are 3 separate, I guess, sort of conferences, you know, all in one. The one today has some really good information, and you know, Reverend Richardson is an excellent speaker, and you know, I look forward to hearing what he has to say. But the other speakers are too. I just want to let you know that in the Department of Social Services here in Westchester County, we'll do whatever we can to help fathers to keep families together. We have tried different things in order to work with child support, to try to make things better for people. And we will continue to do that. We've done a few projects, a few demonstration projects, which seem to indicate that if we can just make it easier for guys to, you know, get a job and start paying their child support. If they owe arrears, we can work things out maybe where we can start to forgive some of the arrears so that you can go forward and basically with a clean slate. I will continue to do that. I just have to keep putting in for waiver requests, and we'll just do everything we can for you, for people. It's an important thing. I just want to thank Frank Williams and for putting this forward. We've been a little busy in the Department of Social Services, and I appreciate the fact that Frank was able to come along and basically offer a hand and help us out. We're good partners with the Youth Bureau in White Plains, but also I appreciate Frank's work on this behalf. And with that, I just want to say have a great conference. I'll be listening in as much as I can. And one other thing, early voting starts today. And if any of you guys, have the time, I believe it starts at noon, it ends at 5. There's a bunch of them goes on between now and the day before elections. I would suggest that you get out there and vote. Bring your umbrella. But I think this year is going to be very, very important. And I also think it's a good example to show for your children that, participating in the society and making your vote count is a very, very important thing. And I just want to wish you all the best of luck, the best of health, and, some success out there in the job market. If you have one, we'll try to help you keep one. If you don't have one, I just suggest that you can work with our Workforce Investment Board and the One Stop in Mount Vernon. We'll do everything we can to help you out. So with that, Frank, I'll just hand it over to you, and just wish you all a really good conference, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Commissioner McGuire. And I want to thank you for your team working on this conference, Commissioner Rosa Boone, Troy Deckham, and Tenegra for helping to bring this conference into fruition. We thank you for your support, and we're looking forward to a great day today and great 2 sessions to follow. Just to note, today's presentation will speak to 3 topics. One is civic engagement, the other is food insecurities, and then the last one is on education. I'm honored at this time to present to you Deacon D. Whitmore Smith, who will now introduce our speaker for the morning. Deacon Smith.
Unmute.
Needs to be unmuted.
Just needs to unmute himself.
Yeah, Matt, can you unmute him?
I can't do it on my end. He does need to do it himself. That's one of the.
Deacon Smith.
Just send him a little note in the chat.
Dr. Rick is
Frank, you might have to intervene. It sounds like he's got some issues.
Frank's got on me too.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I am honored and privileged to bring to you the esteemed Pastor Reverend Dr. Reverend Franklin Richardson, who is the illustrious pastor of Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon. Are you on, Roy?
Yes.
We're having some
Yeah,
problems.
just continue, Frank.
Go ahead, Frank.
His audio is not
Yeah, he is certainly been involved in this work for many, many years, both nationally and internationally. He's active with the with civil rights and been in the forefront of leadership in our country. And we're just so very happy to have him with us to talk about these issues with regards to fathers. as I noted earlier, he had just written a book, and we hope to have him say a few words about his new book. But I am, as the New York Fathering Committee, our committee is so happy to have him to come and talk about the issues of fathers in our community in terms of health, well-being, and employment. So I bring to you at this time, Reverend Dr. Franklin Richardson.
Thank you, Frank. Can everybody hear me? Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to be a part of this conference. I'm grateful for the invitation. I think it's very important what you are doing, and I'm grateful. I want to thank Frank for his kind introduction, and for Brother DeWitt Smith, who helped facilitate my coming to this event. I want to say that as fathers, the idea of fatherhood is a common ground for all of us. It's a common ground regardless of the ethnic origins, regardless of where we live locally. We all have a sense of definition and a sense of participation in fatherhood. And so it is a place where we can come together. It's a ground place, it's fundamental. All of us have known a father or have known someone who has functioned as a father in our lives. All of us understand that fatherhood is a very challenging and takes on the nuances of the circumstances. Fathers have to be always adjusting because the problems are new. I tell my children, I'm a father and have grandchildren. I tell my children now that if I knew being a grandfather was so good, I would have skipped over being a father, because it's a big fun thing with being a grandchild. But let me say, at the same time, the ground of our being able to find unity around this is that all of us have participated in some way or another. Some of us on this call are fathers. All of us are sons and daughters. In some cases, fathers were absent in our families, and we don't have that origin. He made reference to my book, Witness to Grace, A Testimony of Favor, and it's available on Amazon and also gracechurchtoday.org. And in it, I really began talking about my journey as a father and as a son. It's important for us to consider, when we think about African-American fathers, the historical realities out of which we emerge. You cannot really jump into addressing adequately the issues of fathering in the African-American community without giving consideration to the historical journey or the historical episodes that present the fatherhood as we see it and as fathers today. So I want to begin talking about this whole historical understanding of fatherhood and how it's played out. My father was his father, and I mentioned this in my book. My father's father left South Carolina early on in his life. He never knew his father. And at 15 years old, he was accused of misspeaking to a white woman in South Carolina. And he had to leave South Carolina under the cover of night because they came to actually lynch him because of this protocol impeachment that they had accused him of. And so he made his way to Baltimore. And in Baltimore, he met a guy who was a questionable character. And a friend of my father's father, who my father had not met, saw him and called my father's father in Philadelphia and said to him, "Your boy is down here and he's messed up. He's connected with a very strange character. And I think something needs to be done." And my father's father said to him, "Send the boy to me." And my father met his father for the first time in 1940 at 15 years old. So the journey of fatherhood is a journey that has been colored by the existence of systemic racism in America. And we have to understand that racism has impacted racism has impacted the lives of fathers, even though it's kind of like a fallout. It's a casualty to fallout, because even though we are in the 21st century and we are in 2020, fathers are impacted, African-American fathers are impacted by our origins. When I say that, what I mean is that, first of all, fathering in the African-American community was disrupted by the very passage and interest of African-Americans into this country. African-Americans came into the United States as slaves, and their families were intentionally disrupted. So you follow that the historical origin of fathering in the African-American community in America was intentionally disrupted by the reality of slavery. Slavery disintegrated African-American families. And so fathers were displaced, families were broken up, and the whole issue of family in the context of historical America emerges. So the African-American family emerges out of an intentional disruption. And fathering in many times on the slave plantation was almost adoptive. We had a sense of, fathers had a sense of all the children belong to me, and I have to look out for all the children. And as things emerged out of slavery, black men began to get married and take on life, but yet black fathers, black men operated under the stigma of the racial past. So as a result, the black man and black father was the victim of stigmas and stereotypes. So you had an emerging America after slavery, after 1865, after the post-Reconstruction. You had a participation of people who were fostering stigmas of African-American men, therefore African-American fathers. So you had people say black men are lazy, black men are stupid. You had all of these kinds of stereotypes, the Jim Crow era, the vestiges of the cartoons made of black fathers, the expressions of black fathers being diminished, black men being laughed at, black men being hung as fruit on the trees, the result of lynching. All of these dynamics have affected fathering in the black community and has affected the perception of black men in the America. So what you are doing, I commend, because you are really attacking a historical problem. And this problem is not going to go away. It doesn't go away by itself. It won't just wear out. We have to be intentional about reinforcing and helping fathers who are the victims of the stigma of black racism in America, the consequences of which we end up with. And then you get into modern America, where the court systems and the social systems encourage the dissolve of the black family. So you have fathers who can't stay home if their families get assistance from the government. They can't live in the same house unless, so they can't get the benefits, and so they have to leave. So the society has not been encouraging to African-American fatherhood, has not been. And this is just one aspect of the fallout of systemic racism. But the whole idea of fatherhood has not been celebrated, has not been affirmed, and you all are in a great space because you can help to turn this situation around, because it is a serious problem. It's a conflict. And then you look at the disproportionate numbers of African-American men who are the victims of a unjust criminal justice system, where disproportionate numbers of African-Americans are in jail and are victims of systems that reinforce the stigmas that carried over. So you have families, Black families can constantly, if they are the victims, disproportionate victims of criminal justice system, they can't be good fathers. They may be biological participants in the delivery of children, but they can't be good fathers because they have to be present. And the more Black men you put in jail, the more black men you put in jail disproportionately, the more you inhibit fathering in the African-American community. What happens? So these challenges have intergenerational consequences. They go on over and over again. So a child born with no father ends up having to raise himself, or without the counsel of a male person. So I mean, this is a convoluted. It's very important. It's not enough to just tackle the problem. It's not enough to just tackle the fact that we're going to embrace fathers. We have to understand this awesome journey of neglect and discrimination that has affected African-American men, therefore affected African-American fatherhood, therefore making Black men, and it's amazing to me that how many wonderful Black fathers have emerged in the face of these consequences. And they have emerged primarily because of their faith communities and the informal celebration of family in the Black community. But the challenge is to understand this historical consequence. Now, secondly, and I don't want to be more than that time I should have. But secondly, I think not only is this historical element, I think that's very important, that if we talk about addressing fatherhood challenges of the 21st century, we have to consider the historical consequences of our past and how that impacts on Black men being fathers, and how the criminal justice system participates in that, and how the stigmas and stereotypes foster negative environments. And so people end up saying Black men are lazy. Well, they can't get a job because they've got a criminal record. I mean, just a perpetuation. It's a convoluted, complex understanding, but it's important if we're serious about fatherhood understanding and encouraging fatherhood, that we understand that consequence, that context. Secondly, we must also consider very contemporarily, immediately rather, the COVID-19 consequences. So layered on top of this 400 years of systemic racism and its consequences, layered on top of that comes this whole idea of African Americans and people of color being the most impacted negatively by COVID-19. So now we got fathers who have this historical consequence, and we have these problems of health and economics that are complicated by COVID-19, and Black families disproportionately are affected by the lack of healthcare that preceded COVID-19. And COVID-19 just simply came to pull the covers off and show us how the reality that we were living with. So fathers are affected today by this COVID, they're impacted by this. And yet we find occasion to see fathers whom we can celebrate in spite of the disparities of resources and consideration. It is remarkable to me, every time I see, and I see many of them, positive Black fathers who have survived an environment of neglect and discrimination and inadequate resources, it is clearly an occasion to celebrate. If we understand the impact of racism on trying to be a Black father in America, then we can be better able to provide resources and assistance so that they can be effective fathers, and to understand that ultimately the future of African Americans will be greatly impacted by what kind of fathers African Americans have and the resources we make for those fathers. So it's not about just the father himself, it's about the family, it's about the generations ahead. One of the great challenges we have is that when this COVID has introduced this slowdown of education, this interruption really of education through the unable to go to school, through the lack of devices, the lack of children not having, and their families not being able to understand the technology and assist them online. These things will affect the future of our nation, and the degree to which there is disparity in providing education will affect the kind of country we become. So, and the challenge we face ahead, and the challenges that Black fathers will have as they seek to raise their children. So for me, this historical consequence, COVID-19, are considerations that have to be, if we're serious about empowering fathers and helping them to be fully what they ought to be. Yet, it's so wonderful that beyond the stigmatisms, beyond the oppression of the society, beyond racism, we have been able to see, and we celebrate today, fathers who are loyal, who are hardworking, who are productive and providers, fathers who demonstrate love, fathers who care for their families, who raise their children, who sacrifice for them to go to college, to get advanced, fathers who are fathers stand on the foundation of the fathers who preceded us. So I want to encourage the work you're doing and also say that it is important that if we are serious about affecting African-American fathers, we have to take into consideration the historical blockages, the contemporary obstructions, including criminal justice, the lack of access to healthcare, the lack of access to education, and we have to consider the complexity of what fathers have to navigate through in order to be effective, the stuff they have to overcome that some other races don't have to overcome. And I would lift that up as my offering to you today. I had 10 or 15 minutes, I think, and I offer that as an offering and a product for discussion. But that has been my journey, to participate in a world where every aspect of African-American life has been touched negatively by the existence of systemic racism. And the degree to which we take that serious will be the degree to which we can really provide assistance, resources, and help to those who are trying to be good fathers in this society. Brother Frank.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Franklin Richardson. Thank you for your perspective. Thank you for your historical perspective and giving us some background on where we came from, where we are, and what we must do to strengthen our fathers, strengthen our families, and strengthen our communities. We appreciate your words, and we just ask that you continue to be a shining light in our community and our nation. And our prayers are with you in everything that you do to bring light into this world that we live in. I am happy now to present Ernest McFadden, who's going to introduce our first presenter. And we're asking that at the end of each presenter, if you have questions, please put it in our chat box. Again, if you haven't registered, you can get the registration form out of our chat box. So I'm honored at this time to have Ernest McFadden, Program Administrator of the Westchester County Youth Bureau, to present our first speaker.
Brother Edwards, is it okay? Am I excused?
Yes. Thank you again, Dr. Richardson, and be well and God bless.
Yeah, I have to do a funeral, so I have to leave. I'd love to stay for the conference, but I have to go. Thank you, Brother Smith. God bless you.
All right. Brother Ernest McFadden. Okay, I see Ernest is not with us right now, so we're going to go right into our first presentation is with Mayo Bartlett. Mayo has been engaged in this work with father development, family development. He's a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer, an activist. He's engaged in trying to help fathers get the needed resources and supports that they need. His presentation is on civic engagement. And we know that we're in the midst of one, we've been dealing with the issue of the census, and now we're in the midst of voting. But even beyond voting, the issue is of father community participation, father's enablement, and he's going to come to us and share with us his perspective about civic engagement. Brother Mayo Bartlett, happy to welcome you.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for having this forum. I think it's tremendously important, and I'd like to talk to everyone a little bit about the historical perspective in terms of some of the impediments that have existed for fathers, in particular African-American fathers in the United States. But I think the lessons go beyond that, and they impact all fathers, and I want to talk about that a little bit, and talk about how important it is that we're involved in terms of civic engagement, in terms of educating ourselves and looking at which candidates we should be supporting when it's time to vote, and also recognizing the importance of the vote. And yeah, I'm a former prosecutor. I was in the district attorney's office, started in 1992 under Carl Vergari, and served under Jeanine Pirro as well. And in the course of my career as a prosecutor, I really was fortunate to get a really great view of what the criminal justice system is. And it gave me an opportunity to look at, some of its deficiencies as well as areas where it could be improved. But as it relates to fathers in particular, I've had occasion to speak with Phil Banks. He's a good friend of mine who was the former chief of police for the NYPD. And we would talk about, how sometimes checkpoints, for instance, vehicle and traffic checkpoints would be set up in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. And so it's not a surprise that the people who would get arrested would be people that are in those neighborhoods. And when you look at that, and you look at how sometimes those arrests are used to drive revenue, but more importantly, how they create a stigma for the person who gets arrested, and how they may prevent that person from being gainfully employed, we have to stop and say, well, why is it that this is the policy? Going back to stop and frisk, and to this day, Rudy Giuliani still supports stop and frisk, says that was a great program, and talks about how wonderful it was. But the statistics showed that over 90% of the people who were stopped were African-American and didn't commit any crime. So when we stop and look at what the consequences are, number one, just for your dignity, and just imagine walking down the street and being with your children and being put up against a wall and having your pants around your ankles for no reason whatsoever, other than the fact that you're suspicious based upon the amount of melanin you have in your skin. That tells your children that they can't look to you as a source of protection because you're not able to protect yourself. So when we stop and look, and as Reverend Richardson put it, I think he did a great job, that hopefully most of us, if not all of us, had either a father or someone who filled the role of a father, some adult figure that you could look toward. And unfortunately, I realize many people don't have anyone like that. But imagine having that figure, and then having that figure just being totally disrespected, having that figure spoken to as if he was a child, and being powerless on an encounter for no reason whatsoever. So some of the impediments that we look at even are something as simple as if someone has a child and owes child support, that in this age of COVID, and in any period of time, but in particular during a pandemic, that if you fall behind in your child support payments, you fall into what they call arrears. What happens is you can actually lose your license. They will suspend your driver's license because you are behind in payment. And if you live in Westchester County and you work in New York City, or you work in Putnam or Rockland, even more so, you may need your license to get to work, or even within Westchester County. Now you've lost your license. Does it make it more likely you're going to be able to catch up on the child support? No. So now the farther behind you fall, the further behind you fall in child support, now the more likely you are to be in a position where you still have to drive to go to work. But if you get caught driving, you can have an aggravated unlicensed operation, which is a criminal charge for driving with a suspended license. And there you could either face probation or jail. You could face up to 6 months jail. So we have to stop and say, well, why is it that we're doing this? Why would you tell someone that you want them to be responsible and to support their family, yet at the same time you're installing barriers to their ability to do so, and then you're imposing criminal penalties on top of that when someone's attempting to do what you think they should be doing? So we would look at these things, and as a prosecutor, I'd say, well, this doesn't make much sense, so I would take that into account. But not every prosecutor is going to do that. Now, as a defense attorney, civil rights lawyer, I'm making these arguments to prosecutors, talking about what makes sense. The other thing is, as Reverend Richardson said, there are sometimes impediments to having fathers live with their families, structural impediments to the family. And those structural impediments do go back to slavery, where family would be auctioned off and sold to someone else. So when you have these impediments and you're telling someone that they can't live in the household, and if they're found living in the household, they jeopardize the ability of the family to remain in the house, that's a significant impact to the family. And we're living in an age where there are impacts to the family to begin with, because the family is really not cherished anymore, no matter who you are. We're more in an age of the individual, where we're told if we are doing okay, everything is fine. You don't have to worry about anything else. It doesn't matter what's happening with your neighbors, with your fellow human beings. And we've moved away from a sense of community. And so if you look at the Greenwood district in Tulsa, which was the site of the Tulsa massacre, which was a thriving Black community, which was destroyed largely because it was a thriving Black community. I think that independence is tremendous. To the degree that we can become financially independent and politically independent, and be able to police ourselves, it removes a lot of these impediments. But in order to do so, these days in particular, we have to think outside the box. But we do need to come together as a community and recognize that we are responsible for one another, because if we don't do that, then we're always going to be at risk of being isolated. So one of the things that's critically important, especially right now during time of election, with my kids, I would always bring them to vote with me. Anytime I went to vote, I brought them to vote. And, look, I don't have any illusion that because I vote for someone that the world's going to change 100%, everything's going to be perfect. I understand that once I've voted, that it's my job to hold the people who we've elected responsible. But I understand if I don't participate in the vote, then I don't really have a say. And at that point, I've kind of handed over my fate to somebody else. So even if I vote and the people that I want to win don't win, that's okay. I still participate in the system. I want my children to participate in the system. And in this age of misinformation, there's a tremendous effort by foreign powers to convince us that our vote's not important and that we're wasting our time when we vote. And nothing can be further from the truth. So if you look even at a state like New York, which is a big state, which pays a ton of money into the federal government, much more than it receives, and contrast that with Wyoming, which has a population roughly half the size of Westchester County, yet both only get 2 senators. So if both only have 2 senators, their power is tremendously greater than ours is. So when we stop to contemplate that and to look at where our tax dollars go, to consider the fact that somebody who, let's take a young father who gets convicted of a narcotics case, and it doesn't have to be a drug kingpin, a small narcotics case. You get convicted of having 10 bags of drugs and being interested in distributing those narcotics to somebody. At that point, you will likely be put out of your home if you live in public housing. So if you're a poor person, on top of that, greater impact. Than if you're wealthy, then you can stay in your own house. No one's going to tell you you can't live in a house that you own. But also, if you're convicted, less likely for you to be able to get a job, more likely that when you come out of jail, if you go to jail, that you're going to be in a situation where now you may have to stay at the shelter. And the shelter in Westchester County charges $6,200 per person per month. $6,200 per person per month. And if we were to suggest that we should spend that same amount of money for us to be able to maybe help that father who's in arrears, to come up to where he should have been in terms of child support, no one would say that we should do that. In fact, it would be suggested that that's un-American, it's socialist, that we're giving a handout. But yet we're giving $6,200 for a person to be in a shelter where they receive virtually no benefits and they're on top of other people who have other issues. So these are some of the things we have to start to look at. Why is this the model? Why is this the model of engagement? Why is it that when you dial 911 on a medical call, you are likely to have the police show up? These are things also that we have to think about, because this can be traumatic, not only to the parents, but to the children as well. Again, if you have a medical situation, and I've had a number of cases where there were medical calls where the police show up and the police force their way into someone's home on a medical call. Not only have you not committed a crime, but again, now you feel that you're not safe in your own home. So civic engagement is pivotal. It's important that we know our mayors, our city council persons. It's important that we are engaged, that we are aware of who the police commissioners are, that we have relationships with all of these people, and that we form our own organizations and make sure that we're well versed in the things that impact us. So for instance, we're talking about fatherhood, but if our water's poison and we live in Flint, Michigan, I think it's a little academic how great a father we are if our kids are being poisoned. And I think we have to ask ourselves, how is it that for 20 years through multiple administrations, nothing's changed there? Why do people of Flint, Michigan paying taxes? I mean, are they really United States citizens, or are they something else? If there's something else, then maybe they should revisit where they are and whether they need to stay here. But for people to have such a disparity in terms of what they get, to have poor people, again, whether you're black, white, it doesn't matter. You're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and you're a poor white person, you're subject to the same things. Why is it that you're drinking poison water? Why is it that when we drive through parts of New Jersey, you have to hit recirculation in your car in order to breathe the air because you're driving through chemical fumes, and people living there, they're trying to raise their children there, and they're going to have cognitive problems because they're going to have heavy metals in their system. So how is it that we allow these things to happen in particular neighborhoods, not others? I think that these are some of the things we have to think about, and we have to look at what's important and engage civically. So when it's time to elect the next government in White Plains, is it really important whether the French American school is going to be allowed to open, or are there other things that are more important? So we tend to quite often get distracted and to focus on things that don't really impact us in the grand scheme of things, because as much as we fight the French American school, there'll be a new mall that'll create more traffic that nobody will have a say about. So these are just some of the things that I think we need to look at. There's a book called Bowling Alone, and that book talks about how we are moving away from each other in ever increasing numbers, and how all the institutions that we used to turn to are either weakened or have gone away altogether. And in the age of COVID, again, it's much more likely that they're going to be gone. We're sitting on a time right now where there are going to be furloughs in our local city and federal and state governments due to lack of funds. And I think that we have to fight for the things that we think are important. And quite often you'll hear people say that they want to defund the police. I prefer to look at what we want to have funded. And to me, if we want to have a youth bureau, I think it's important that we state that we need a youth bureau. I think that it's imperative. If we don't say that, youth bureaus may go away. If we don't have a youth bureau in our community, then we should talk about, yes, we need one, but then we should also talk about what does it look like? What is it actually going to be? Because it's not enough simply to have it. Does it actually serve the purpose that it's intended to serve? Are there things it can do better? Going back to how the 911 calls are routed, perhaps on medical calls, the police shouldn't be the first to respond. And in many respects, we'd be doing them a favor, because it's not a police matter. It's something that requires a medical professional or a mental health professional. But in the year 2020, it's inescapable to me that we seem to be paralyzed by things that are fairly simple, that really are not major challenges. We can talk about sending people to the moon, but we can't talk about how we solve these very basic needs. And going to, I want to just talk very briefly about schools, because you can be the best parent in the world. And right now, lots of parents feel that they have to send their children back to schools that they don't feel are safe because they're working. Maybe they're working a job or two jobs sometimes, and they don't have anyone to watch the child, especially for a younger child, or even for an older child. Lots of pregnancies occur, teen pregnancies, when the parents are at work and the kids are home. we have to start looking at why is it that we allow the government to characterize certain careers as essential. And it seems to me all the people who have essential jobs are the ones that are most disposable, the ones who are most at risk. And all of my friends who work in finance, they're not going back to work until July. They're not going back to work till next summer. So there's a reason they're not going back to work till next summer. It's not that these companies don't want to take advantage of the buildings that they're paying rent on or that they have a mortgage on. It's because they think it's dangerous. So why is it that we have, let's say, in one town, same town, an Edgemont in Greenburgh and a Woodlands High School in Greenburgh? How is it that in one town we have those two schools? They're not separate villages. It's all part of the same town. One school's a nationally award-winning school, the other's not. One school has a lot of money and resources, the other's not. I went to Woodlands High School, and I go back there. It doesn't look as good as it did when I went there 40 years ago, almost 50 years ago. So if we can have the best people teaching online via Zoom right now, why is anybody else teaching at all? Why doesn't everybody have access to that best teacher? Why doesn't everybody have access to the information? How much does it possibly cost to make sure everybody has internet? We're talking about 5G every day, but how about basic internet that allows your child to be able to have a basic computer? It doesn't have to be a top spec computer, but one that allows him or her to be able to have access to all the information that exists and have the best and the brightest teaching them so that they become in turn the best and the brightest. And if we look at it just from an economic standpoint, it helps everybody rise. It doesn't just help the Black or brown family rise. It helps every single family rise, because now we have a more prepared society. We have a society that's trained in a variety of different things and can fill the vast number of needs that we have, some of which we don't recognize we're going to have. And it takes into account that some of the traditional industries and careers are no longer going to exist, that your Facebooks don't hire the same number of people that an IBM is going to hire, so they can't carry your town anymore, and that you don't have to live in the same town where Facebook exists in order to work there, that you can do so remotely from the Cayman Islands. So we have to really start to look at, number one, leading by example. And I was very fortunate. Look, I have a phenomenal father, but I also I can count at least a dozen men of all races, but a lot who were African-American, and who I could look to as a father figure. And I could look to and say, this is a person that we respect. Police officers that we looked to, and we knew that this officer was the youth officer. Even if you never got into trouble, he knew you, we knew him. It was community policing. So we talk about community policing, but at the same time, we're destroying the actual community itself. We don't take time to build the community itself. So we don't look at how we support the actual members of the community. Quite often we look at ever increasing ways to punish them. We look at spending $100,000 a year for somebody to be in prison for a very minor transgression. And yet at the same time, that father that goes to jail for driving with a suspended license because he's behind in child support, we'll spend that $100,000, and then we'll spend the $6,200 for him to be in a shelter, but we wouldn't give the child that amount of money that's owed. And sometimes that money's $2,500, $3,000, $4,000. So there's a disconnect there. And I think that we need to have that type of a conversation. And by saying so, and I'm about to wrap up, I'm not suggesting that our elected officials are consciously making these decisions. They're following in the footsteps of people who came before them. And it's natural for us to continue to do things the way that it's been done and say, this is how we do it. But it's time really to reimagine and reinvent some of our institutions and look at why we're doing what we're doing, and should we be doing it? Is there an actual benefit? And if there's harm in what we're doing, then that should be discontinued and replaced with something that achieves the desired result, assuming the desired result is the health and well-being of our families and communities. So thank you. Tremendously appreciate you having me here, and it's a pleasure. And I'm very happy to entertain any questions that we may have, whether it's now or at some other point during the presentation.
So Mayor, we have, thank you. And thank you again for bringing these issues to our attention. And I wanted, before I have a question, but I wanted to ask you, we see what's happening down in Florida with men coming out of the prison system, and they're being denied the right to vote. Their roadblocks and barriers are being placed in their way to keep them, more than 30 some thousand men coming back to the community. How widespread is this problem, and why do these problems continue to persist?
It's a tremendously widespread problem. I can't give you specifics about every community, but virtually every state that I'm aware of, this is an issue, whether it's state action or it's something that's being suggested by local municipalities. For instance, in California, even right now, there are illegal ballot boxes that are out there where the Republican Party happens to be doing it right now. And I'm not suggesting that they're the only party that engages in this, but you can put your ballot in that box and nobody knows what's going to happen. It's not an official ballot, so a box. But also there are efforts online and otherwise to tell people that if you've been convicted of a crime, you can't vote. And even in New York State, we hear people being told that all the time, and they have the misconception that they can't vote. You can't vote while you're incarcerated, but once you're home, you're able to vote. And so people are not made aware of that. And it's a tremendous challenge. I think that when you stop and look at what's happening there, it's an effort to clearly sway to vote in a particular community and possibly even in a state. But then you also have to stop and ask yourself, if the right to vote is pivotal, it's one of the things that we consider to be the most fundamental rights that we have. And in my estimation, if you're not permitted to vote, then you shouldn't be taxed either, because you're now participating and supporting a system that you really have no say in and doesn't work for you.
Thank you. We have a question coming from Scott, and this will be our last question. Is that in White Plains and Greenburgh, we do have great community men out and volunteering in our community. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other efforts where men are engaged in our community? You see models or examples where this work is being given to help improve men. I know that the African-American men of Westchester, many are by fraternities, of course, this committee. Are there efforts or models that you've seen where people are putting a spotlight on bringing awareness, education, information to the issues and needs of men specifically, and specifically men of color?
Yes, absolutely. And before I do, I just want to ask everybody, when you watch TV today and you're going to see somewhere in Ohio or some other state where people are online for like 4 or 5 hours, they're standing in line to vote. And thankfully, we're not in that situation. When I want to go vote, I'm going to vote today. When I go vote today, I might be online for 5 minutes and I'm going to be inside during that period of time. I might be outside because of COVID, but I've never had a 4-hour line for me to go exercise my right. And that does not happen when you're going to vote in wealthy districts. There are enough voting areas for you to go in, and it's seamless. So that's another effort to take away the vote. But going back to what you're saying, yes, the African-American Men of Westchester, which I happen to be a member of, is engaged in a tremendous number of endeavors, everything from healthcare to criminal justice, talking about domestic violence awareness, talking about accountability and responsibility, and environmental justice, as well as a host of other things, Business Skills Olympics. But another organization that I would highlight, you have the Guardians, which is a Black policing agency, and they do a lot of work in the public. There are a lot of other Blacks in law enforcement. And then there's the 100 Black Men. And I highlight 100 Black Men right now. My really dear friend, Phil Banks Sr., who worked with me in the DA's office when we ran the hate crime unit, is the father of Philip Banks Jr., who was one of the first, if not, I believe, the first African-American chief of police in New York City, has been engaged in terms of uplifting African-American families and working largely with fathers. But they also were pivotal in the implementation of the Eagle Academy. And the Eagle Academy is a charter school which is predominantly Black and brown kids, but they have forums on Saturday mornings for the parents and for the kids. And it's packed. If you go there, I've presented there on Saturday mornings, and everybody's there. They want to be there. Now, I think that's a tremendous model. They've done a tremendous job working there. Personally, I'd love to see every school be that way. I mean, if we have a model that allows us to have a Scarsdale or an Edgemont or an Eagle Academy, that model can be replicated in any local school district. We do have to look at responsibility and accountability, and that has to go not just in terms of law enforcement and elected officials, but it also has to be in the community. So we have to look at what we're doing, hold ourselves accountable. As a father in particular, it's imperative that we understand that our children didn't ask to be brought into this world, that we brought them into this world, whether it was intended or otherwise. But once they are coming into this world, we have a responsibility to be good parents and to be a good model and to carry ourselves in such a way that not only our children can look up to us, but other people in the community can look at us and take us seriously. And it doesn't mean you need to be a doctor, attorney, or a wealthy person. You may be a person who's a janitor. And one of the people I looked up to was, and still look up to this day, because of the man that he was. And I go back to my grandparents. My mother was the daughter of a coal miner. Okay, so my father was a son of 2 domestic workers. And, my grandmother on my mom's side was a teacher. But look, in West Virginia, I know that they put in and did things that they never wanted to do because it benefited us and that it would give us additional opportunities. And my grandfather died prematurely as a coal miner. So when I listen to people talk about coal mining, it hits home with me, because I realize what that really is, and that nobody's really interested in being a coal miner. They just want a good job. But I think that all of these things are important. And there are organizations, and there are many more that I haven't mentioned, that we can become involved with. And I think that our involvement's important, because you may have something that's important that we may not be aware of. And Frank, as you know, when we start talking about a lot of these organizations, I'm maybe middle of the road in terms of age, but I'm nowhere near the oldest people, and they're generally not a ton of people younger than me. So I didn't trim my beard today, so you could see that, I'm getting there. So, but when your younger people are AARP recipients, then there's a problem with the organization, because we're not handing down that institutional memory, and we're not telling people about the history of the organization. And the other thing is to make sure that we're aware that organizations exist. Lots of people have youth bureaus in their community. They don't take advantage of it. They don't even know it exists. So it's important to go online to your local community and find out what services exist. You may find that there are things that you would love to be engaged in, and you don't know it exists, and you're paying for it. So I think that that's important.
Frank, will you permit me just one quick question for Mayor? Mayor, you've done a phenomenal job. Thank you. But I can't, many of the people we serve in West Cobb, have, the fathers in particular, have the issue of being undocumented. And can you comment on, what recommendations you'd have for those fathers at this point, and how they can they're doing the best they can in many cases, but their undocumented status impacts them tremendously.
There are a number of organizations that you can reach out to that are there to help people who are undocumented. There are sometimes paths to becoming a citizen. And many people who are undocumented pay taxes, they participate in every other way. So it's important to do that. I would suggest that you reach out to do that. Matter of fact, I'm going to give the name and number of an organization. There's a gentleman named Rob.
Yeah, you are stupid.
I'm sorry. There's a gentleman named Rob Horn, and Mr. Horn is an attorney. He's with the Regional Immigration Assistance Center, and that's in Westchester County and White Plains. The number is 914-471-5402. And that's a free service. They basically, are there to generally help people who've been charged with crime. But even if that's not the case, I think that they might be able to assist other people. There's some other regional immigration centers that you can contact that might be able to assist you. And you can look at ways that you can become involved in hopefully becoming documented if possible. If not, people that might be able to assist you and your family. And one thing that everybody who's not documented should be aware of is that if you're a victim of a crime or you've been discriminated against, that there are policies and laws in place that prevent you from being targeted based upon your status. And that's important to know, because unfortunately, lots of people who are not citizens are victims of crime and are afraid to contact the police, and they're afraid to, to go to court for anything when they've been wronged. So I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Mayor. You did a phenomenal job. We do appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mayor. Thank you, and be well, and thank you again for giving us your time and your thought about this important topic of how we engage fathers and how we develop these strategies to help them to move and assimilate in our community. So Donovan, go ahead. You have the next platform. Introduce the next speaker.
Well, Frank, thank you so much. During this pandemic period, Westcop has had the challenges and the privileges of providing resources to a number of people across the county. In fact, across multiple counties in the Mid-Hudson Valley region. One of the issues that is at the forefront is the food insecurity issue. And many of you may have become familiar with the work that we've done in New Rochelle under the leadership of Daniel Bonet, who is the Westcop Community Action Program Director there. And this morning, I wanted to introduce Daniel. Very, very proud of Daniel and his team out there and the work that they've done to address the issue of food insecurity. So without further ado, taking time from him, I'm just going to introduce Daniel and ask him to speak about how he's been working with the partnerships and the various volunteers to address the issue of food security in New Rochelle and beyond. Daniel, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Daniel.
Okay. Hi. How is everyone doing today?
We're good.
Good. Good. Yes. So food insecurities, and as it relates, at Westcop and across the board in partnership with other food pantries and Feeding Westchester, we've seen a significant rise of families, obviously using the food pantries throughout Westchester County. More importantly, in New Rochelle, we had a big rise where we, at about 3 to 4 weeks, almost a month stagnant, we were serving close to 18,000 individuals per week. That include women, men, children, and senior citizens. One of the most significant things that did come about as far as the food insecurity is, number one, I'll touch base on a comment that was made, or a question that was made earlier about the undocumented population. One of the things that we saw on that is how the effect of the public charge, a legislation that was put in by President Donald Trump, had an effect on the undocumented population. More importantly, on a lot of males that come from other Latin American countries or other countries around the world that are undocumented. And the public charge, if you read the law, is an extensive paper that really, it's very hard to understand unless you really read political language. And basically, long story short, food pantries do not fall under the public charge, and more importantly, community action centers like the New Rochelle CAP and other CAP centers. So there was a real education and learning curve that needed to be placed, where we would see families, fathers, mothers, standing across the street from 95 Lincoln, thinking extensively whether they should go across the street to get a bag of groceries, canned goods, and meat. It was an interesting aspect. I personally, as well as some other staff, went across the street to have this conversation with these individuals to explain to them about the process, because the fear is that if you use any services, let's say TANF services or DSS, and you are undocumented, in the event that their goal is to become residents of the United States, they will be disqualified for receiving these kind of services. So just to think that getting a bag of groceries from a food pantry, where organizations such as Westcop and other organizations have to keep a sense of data and demographic information, so that always brings a sense of fear. More importantly, one of the things that we saw was, how fathers within their community were being engaged, and more importantly, the aspect of, do I go to work or do I go get food for my family? And that was, and there was a real prideful aspect for men within our community to really find it in themselves to say, I'm going to go to a food pantry and get food for my family, versus I'm going to go and find a job, especially during these times. So when we look at the sense of food insecurity and that level, it really is a conversation starter where organizations and members of the community really have to work together to help fathers and families empower themselves to get the resources that they need to make sure their families get the tools. Sorry, get the tools necessary for them to really thrive. One of the things that we were looking at, there was a research that was done a long time ago by the Parental Psychological of the National Library of Medicine, where they said how food insecurity, they examined how household food insecurity was associated with psychological distress in fathers. And one of the things that they saw in the conclusion of it was that fathers were more likely and high risk of SPD than mothers in food insecure homes. And it was interesting because as they assessed the threat of mental health in fathers, they also looked at how the underrepresented groups that fell, especially fathers of color, really had a bigger impact as compared to women. And it was really interesting data. And if we look at what was happening now, if we look at the demographics of individuals who came to these type of food pantries, they were families of color, Hispanic and Black African-American families that really took advantage of the products and food pantries that are within Westchester County.
Donovan? We can't hear you.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Daniel, for those remarks. I just wanted to add to what Daniel said. You know, we happen to live in what is considered in Westchester County, and Westchester County is considered to be in the top 7 counties in terms of wealth in the nation. However, the poverty experience here is phenomenal, especially in the larger cities, in Yonkers, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, Peekskill, and to a smaller extent in the city of White Plains. So it's very easy for those looking on from the outside to presume that something like food insecurity does not exist. But in a county of approximately 1 million people, it is estimated that about somewhere close to 200,000 of our residents may be experiencing food insecurity. And I wanted to add to this conversation the possibility that the COVID-19 pandemic has driven a very significant unemployment among fathers and fathers of color. Many of those people are the people who are now showing up in the community action centers looking for food. So you don't see them as much because, you know, mostly, you know, we've shut down, the businesses have shut down, and even if they're opening at percentage of what their full workload would be. But Westchester County's unemployment is more than doubled. In fact, I think it's going down a little bit, but it has more than doubled it went from under 4% to almost 12% during the pandemic period. And WestCOP, through the community action centers and other not-for-profits, I always want to represent the other not-for-profits because they too are doing a phenomenal job in trying to address the issues of food insecurity and poverty in general. So what are we dealing with now? We're dealing with fathers, and the Honorable Reverend Richardson spoke, and Honorable Bartlett spoke about the issues of fathers feeling insecure about just being in their homes because of the public requirements for receiving public supports and all of that. But consider a father today, with a family of 1 or 2 or even 3 children, that's now forced to go into the public assistance setting, where due to the loss of income, they have to go into public assistance, and the public assistance support does not support their families anymore. You know,
And Donovan, let me just add too, that when we look at the perspective, you know, it's, you know, sometimes during speaking to families that come to our community action partnerships, and when I speak to mothers, for example, and we start talking about income and self-sufficiency, you know, if, you know, fathers that are giving child support and non-child support, there was a study done by the University of Chicago. And one of their studies indicated that fathers who provide irregular cash support as compared to no support shown an increase of food insecurity for children in middle school and elementary school levels, which are the most really important psychological and developmental stages for a lot of these young people. So when we look at a pandemic, and we look at how many individuals have lost their income, how many individuals have applied for DSS and services, we can definitely see that it does have an impact in the household. However, it's really important too, when, you know, that saying that it takes a village to raise our children and have them grow. During this pandemic, we've seen that the community has really come together. And I've seen a lot of young people that have been resilient, and in an effort they are more aware of the food insecurity aspect. They're more aware how to conserve food and where to find food. And it's pretty inspiring to see how a young person educates the parent, and more importantly, a father who the duty and the role is to be a protector and a giver and so forth, to see that perspective. So during this pandemic, you know, there's a lot of social emotional growth and development, and a lot of issues of just insecurity across the board. But there is a solution, and I know that during these times we can definitely get there.
you know, Frank, one of the consequences of the unemployment and the COVID keeping people more at home is the increase in domestic violence. And unfortunately, and it is tied to the food insecurity issue, because if a father is home and is being pressed by his family to provide, that can put him in a really, you know, challenging position, and embarrassment, insecure, and all of that. So there's an increase in domestic violence. You know, we operate the Victims Assistance Program at WestCOP. We operate 5 centers. While our doors have been closed, we have been providing virtual services to family. There's a phenomenal growth in calls and the need for our intervention. But I think, you know, in terms of, you know, encouraging those fathers who may be participating, or the service workers to fathers, is that we need to encourage fathers as much as possible to access those resources that are in their communities. I can speak specifically of WestCOP. You know, we operate 11 community action centers in 3 counties, and that information is publicly available on our website. You know, we also know, and you know, the commissioner spoke earlier, and I saw Reverend DeCoy, you know, the issue of homelessness is becoming more striking, and it becomes more difficult when people are infected with the virus. It complicates everything. So, but there are resources that are available, and at this point, I think it's appropriate to mention that the United Way 211 service, you know, provides access to service providers, and, you know, just any resident who may be looking for services, whether it's in housing, or it's, you know, addressing food insecurity, or it's addressing employment. The commissioner mentioned the career centers, and WestCOP now operates 3, you know, kind of career centers on our own, and working in conjunction with the county. In New Rochelle, we do that. In Tarrytown and up in Ossining, we started a new project there. There's a whole issue of childcare. If you're a father and you got laid off from work, and you know lost your childcare, you know, there are ample opportunities for childcare, but do the parents know that? WestCOP has 23 centers that you may be able to access, things like that. So I think that in terms of complementing the comments Daniel made earlier, food insecurity is only a part of that fraction, or it is the result of some of the other social ills that fathers are experiencing. And, you know, in this forum, what we'd like to do is to just encourage you to take advantage of the resources that are out there. And you could just go to westcop.org for information, but the Westchester Putnam 211 service will provide additional information about other not-for-profits and other organizations that are providing complementary services.
Thank you, Donovan, and thank you, Daniel, for the good work that you guys are doing. And yes, we need to get the word out about these resources throughout Westchester County and throughout the state. Resources where people can take advantage of these food resources, and communities where they can go and get food. Many houses of worship around the area are providing food. So perhaps one of the things we can do is to develop a catalog of these services. I know many municipalities have identified places where people can receive food. And of course, there's the County Department of Social Services. So I want to commend you and Daniel for the good work that you're doing in this regard.
And Frank, if you don't mind me adding, I'll just add one more thing, especially for fathers, anyone that works with fathers, to really encourage them to take advantage of these food pantries and food programs. There is no need to think that there is some kind of shame or anything of that nature or where your food is coming from. The most important is that a child and a household has food at the table. And if we can eliminate at least one stressor of the multiple stressors that perhaps a household is dealing with, from how they're going to pay their utilities or rent, and if we can just help them with just the food insecurity aspect, then that's something that will help the social and emotional environment within that household.
Yeah, and I think we all agree, if we can just do whatever we can to make sure that people have food. People do have stress. That this is a tough time for all of us in terms of the COVID-19. But again, we thank you, Daniel and Donovan, for the work that you're doing. And we encourage you to continue to do this important work. At this time, I'm bringing Professor Donnie Simmons, who's going to present our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Frank. It's good to be with you. And it's a privilege to be here, quite frankly. This is a very important time in all of our lives. And for us to be able to galvanize like this from an event like COVID is just remarkable. And so I'm here to introduce a really good friend and a colleague. Sometimes when lightning strikes, you can be the beneficiary of that power source, that dynamic power source, clean fuel, clean energy. And that power source at WCC is in the person of Dr. Rebecca Zwick. We've gotten to know each other for the last couple of years, and she is a delight. She's a powerful intellect. And I think there's a lot to be learned from where we go now in education in this time of remote learning. And so as I was thinking about a person who could encapsulate this in a dynamic form, you know, she was the first that entered my mind, and she jumped right on it. And I cannot tell you how appreciative I am that she has done so. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Professor Rebecca Zwick. She is the instructor and curriculum chair of the Criminal Justice and Paralegal Studies program at WCC. There you go, my friend.
Donnie, thank you so much. I need a recording of you actually every day when I wake up. You know how people have like those uplifting messages? I just need you beaming down on me. Thank you really so much for the introduction. It is an honor to be here with these leaders and pillars of the community in Westchester and beyond. I noticed our last speaker had palm trees in the background. Not throwing him under the bus or anything, but our influence and the influence of so many of you extends far beyond just Westchester County. So I'm addressing the topic of education today to the fathers in the group. Obviously, I'm here with really esteemed colleagues and peers, but this is addressed to those of you who came into the room, for just some little more practical information, perhaps. The clients of many of the services that have been described here. So as an educator, of course, I believe in knowledge simply for the sake of knowledge, right? Curiosity, just want to learn about everything. We are here for a short time, might as well know as much about what wags the tail of the dog as possible. But as a social scientist, I'm ultimately interested in actionable plans. How can we take an idea and translate that into action today, not in the future, but right now, in order to move not only our communities forward, which is the focus of so many people here, that heavy lifting, but especially as individuals. How do we as individuals improve ourselves? Because we improve ourselves and we improve our communities. We nurture and heal ourselves and we nurture and heal our communities. Now, as a criminologist, and that is my training, I primarily look at three theories that support the educational efforts of fathers. And that's what I want to talk about, just to give a foundation for looking at education. So first, there's a theory called social learning theory, and that is simply modeling behavior. Your child watches you. Your child watches what you do. Children see and children do. They imitate that. Words are sweet, but watch their feet, right? So you can say this and that and the other thing all day long, but if you actually do the thing. So in the case of education, telling your child to read or to study ultimately is insufficient if they do not see you pick up a book, if they don't see you study. So what are you doing? What are you reading? Are you glued to your phone? There's the idea that if we do something 3 times, it becomes a habit. So even if you are initially resistant to reading in front of your child while they are reading also, and I'm not even talking about reading to your child, right? Just read every night with your child next to you. The second theory that I look at primarily in terms of education is called social bond theory. And I actually wrote, I'm sorry, I'm a teacher, right? I have to, I have to be writing things on the board. But the second thing is social bond theory. And these are the primary variables in social bond theory. It's attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. This was an idea that was formulated by a sociologist, Travis Hershey, back in the 60s. And he spoke specifically about attachment to families, commitment to social norms and institutions like schools and employment, involvement in activities, and especially with dads in schools. This is not just sports. Traditionally, that's always been the avenue for dads, and we're finding in research that well, I'll get to that in a second, but dads, I would like to see dads move beyond sports in educational involvement. And then, of course, the belief that these things are important, right? And then the final theory that I look at is control theory. And control theory is the idea that each of us in our families develops positive pro-social mechanisms that as a parent we use to instill self-control in our children, but that also keep them staying the course. And this is positive peers, this is supporting and scaffolding what they're learning in school. This could be religion. This could be any element that helps direct your child towards normative pro-social behavior. Of course, in criminal justice, what I am concerned of is that pretty rapid development of a sliding scale from slightly deviant delinquent behavior to criminality, right? That's what, in my studies, what I want to stop. So education is a significant variable in each of these theories. Using that is a foundation for approaching your relationship with educating your children, and what does that even look like? I would ask you to ask yourself 4 questions, and I'll go over them briefly. But first, what is the purpose of education? I mean, really, we're all told what the purpose of education is, but do we really believe it? Do we really do that thing called educating ourselves? The second question would be, what is the value of education to me personally? Thirdly, what is the value of education for my child, for my family? And lastly, how can you make online learning work for you? And I'm addressing that because obviously so many colleges right now are online. We're doing remote learning. This is my classroom. You're actually in my classroom. It's my attic. One of my students said it's like I'm teaching from heaven with my blown foam insulation. But this is the reality right now of learning. And so I think about fathers and young parents in general, and I have quite a few students with young children in the background on their laps. They're getting up and cooking dinner while I'm teaching class, and I love it, actually. But I think that's something important to consider, not just because, for example, SUNY Westchester is remote now, and we are remote next semester also, but online learning can really be a great avenue to return to college if going back to a traditional classroom doesn't work for you for a variety of reasons. Going back to a traditional classroom presents myriad obstacles for a lot of adults, not the least of which that you're working and you're taking care of families, and to get up and have to drive to school is hard. So there are positives, I think, about remote learning for sure. So the first question I would ask you to ask yourself is, what is the purpose of education? The state mandates it up to a certain age, right? It's one of the few things that parents are obligated by law to provide for their children. But what does it mean? And for many people, higher education is just a means to get a job. You need that piece of paper, you need that certification to even get your foot in the door. And that's okay. It kind of breaks my heart a little bit as an educator, because of course I want you to love what we're studying. I want you to love learning more. I want you to love abandoning the status quo, setting down the glass of Kool-Aid that you've been drinking, throw away the script that you've been handed about how your life should go, and discover through higher education that world that maybe you didn't know about before. That may be a tall order. So even if you are looking just for a certification, there's a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas about the purpose of education. And the ones that I like the most were first articulated by Plato. They were later articulated by Jefferson, Zeno, one of the Stoic philosophers, that essentially the ultimate aim of education, and this is Plato, I'm duly citing, but the ultimate aim of education is to help people know the idea of the good in order to be virtuous. Jefferson believed that the most important purpose of education was, and to the point that many of our speakers have referenced, to be an educated voter so that you can express your opinion by means of the ballot, ensuring, he said, political liberty, right? Zeno said that it was to think well and to feel good. To me, the purpose of education is to become a more critical thinker. I am committed to not teaching my students what to think, but rather to teach them how to think, to be critical in the best sense of the term, and ultimately to make the world a better place. Because why not? What else are we doing, right? We might as well become more critical, more independent thinkers, and improve this place. I would then ask you to consider, what is the purpose of education to you personally? Personally, how do you feel about education? And I would ask everyone to set aside their experiences of education in K through 12 if it was negative, which can be difficult. I mean, that can be traumatic. I still kind of don't know my multiplication tables by heart because I had really mean math teachers. So that sort of trauma is real, and we need to set it aside though and consider, what is your own philosophy about education? What is your philosophy about knowing the world? Does it include curiosity about the world? Higher learning in college is not necessarily for everyone. There is a certain amount of intellectual heavy lifting that, you know, it's not necessarily for everyone. But I would say that's getting way beyond associates and bachelor's degrees. I think certainly at our college, we do everything possible to ease that path into thinking a little bit differently. Importantly, the relationship between education and income is strong. Direct correlations across the board. There is no research that has shown a negative correlation between increased education and income. It is often referred to, education, as an investment in human capital. So there's that. The third question I would ask you to consider is, what is the value of education to your child and to your family? I taught in a prison in upstate New York for a few years, and one of the most heartening experiences that I had in semesters full of heartening and beautiful experiences was how many people in the incarcerated individual's family went on to study in college, or even just to do better in high school or middle school, because their father was in prison becoming educated. And I taught in a college program. So these guys were incarcerated, they were getting college degrees in prison, and that was inspiring their children and extended family members to pursue their own college education, but also just simply to do better in school, because it gave this common ground for these fathers to talk about. Their phone calls with their kids were about studying, were about doing homework. It was pretty great. So the value of education to your child, everything in the social sciences, from a sociological perspective, looks at the intergenerational transmission of values. What do we pass on in terms of values to our children? And I don't want to necessarily say morality, but what do we pass on in terms of what is important, what is not important? How do you see yourself? Are you a hero? Are you a victim? And in the same way, education as a value is directly transferred to our kids, or, you know, not, right? Or not. The largest analysis was done in 2014. It was an analysis of 66 separate research studies, and those studies showed across the board the association between fathers' involvement in their children's schooling and the educational outcomes of their child. I mean, it was staggering. Again, I said earlier, men traditionally have always used sports as a point of entry into their children's educational life. And I'm not talking about that. Sports has its benefits, but I'm speaking about actual read learning. Student grades, test scores improve, attendance increases, students are more involved in school activities. Parents with more education in general, and this goes to fathers in particular, both talk to their children more, they use more complex and varied language with their children. And if you think about how important increased language abilities is, right? I had a professor years ago who said, if you're ever feeling depressed or frustrated, don't go to a therapist, go to a dictionary. So having an increased vocabulary helps all of us a great deal in making sense of the world. And this all in turn predicts better language and reading skills throughout childhood. Parents with more education have higher expectations for their children's education. They're more likely to make demands on local school districts or feel comfortable advocating for their children. And this in turn predicts greater educational attainment for their children. Research has also consistently shown that children generally follow their parents' educational trajectory. Of course, there are notable exceptions, but for the most part, if your father has a associate's degree, at a minimum, you are going to have an associate's degree. You are probably going to go on for a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, and so forth. And this, again, this connection with income is important. About 42% of American men who are raised in the bottom fifth of incomes stay there as adults. About 65% of men and women who are born in the bottom fifth stay in the bottom two-fifths. So why is that? Why are we born into a certain social class and we stay in that social class when we can see either around us or, you know, on social media now, we can see that there are alternate ways of being positive, pro-social, normative ways of being and raising up our children. The last point that I wanted to address is making online learning work for you. And in this case, I'm just speaking to anyone who's considering taking an online class, because this is, we are all part of Zoom University now. I want to address that because I also think, you know, from what I'm reading, and I haven't read hard research yet, I don't think that we have it, but anecdotally, there's a lot of fears that because so many students are required to do remote learning right now, and I'm sorry, I'm using those terms interchangeably. Online classes at the college level are generally considered asynchronous, meaning it's not a live professor teaching a live class. That's how we refer. Remote learning is teaching a live class. Most people whose kids are in K through 12, if they're doing any learning at home, it's considered remote learning. So I think that this is a really significant concern, how many kids are possibly falling behind. I start to think about this and then I just get sad and then I don't think about it. I'll let the researchers do the research and then I'll read what they write. But it appears to be anecdotally that this is a real issue, that some people are feeling children are going to start falling behind because they're not comfortable in this environment, and that adults who ordinarily would have possibly been right on the precipice of engaging in college education are now taking steps back because they're not sure how this can work. So just briefly, I wanted to address, I think, how we're doing it at SUNY Westchester, which I feel is very successful in other schools as well. But basically, online learning is usually asynchronous, and now it is frequently synchronous, meaning you have a choice of taking a class that is either at 11 o'clock, you need to be here in front of your video camera, engaging with me as your professor, or it can be asynchronous, which means you're working on your own schedule entirely. And I oftentimes encourage students who have young children and who are balancing a lot of work schedules to take the asynchronous classes. I teach those also. The level of engagement is not as strong, probably the benefit that those students don't have to have me in their living room twice a week for 3 hours yapping at them. But I am engaged in terms of, reading their work and going through their work and communicating throughout the week. The benefits, of course, of synchronous learning are that I think that it's a much richer and much more nuanced experience. You're engaging with your fellow students much more, bit more of a deeper educational experience. If you're looking for more than just a piece of paper, I mean, if you just want the piece of paper to slap on your wall and be like, I did this thing, then that's probably okay. But I think that being able to interact with people and the teacher is important. And how do you do it? How do you make this work in your house? And I found from research that I've read, but also in communicating with my students about what makes it successful for them and what makes it less successful. And we all learned quickly last spring what is not successful. But the first is to make a space for yourself. Physically, find a space in your home that you can have a modicum of quiet, that you make it clear to your children that you're studying. And if they want to sit next to you, if they want to watch what you're doing, if they want to read a book while you're in your class, that's okay. But to find that space, students who have to, and this is a big concern for the college, but students who have to use their phones to communicate or are dialing in from work and aren't able to appear in video, that can be a little bit trickier, which is the next point of show your face. Show your face. Again, this is all anecdotal. They haven't started coming out with the hard and fast research yet, but we see it all for us here, right? Just being able to see different people's faces, being able to see people's reactions is important. It is human and social communication. Front of the classroom means engaging, commenting in the chat room, being comfortable speaking up. And sometimes the nice thing about online learning is that students who oftentimes are not comfortable raising their hand in a physical classroom, in a physical space, and a lot of times that reason can be cultural, they feel comfortable typing something in the chat box. They'll ask a question in the chat box, or they feel a little bit more comfortable asking the question from the comfort of their home. And then lastly, it's the idea of committing to finding 5 allies on campus. Finding 5 people, wherever it is, whatever the campus is, that you can speak to. And this is challenging now, of course, because we are all so remote. But I think oftentimes it's the snowball effect. If you find one professor that you can count on for assistance or for help navigating the educational environment, then they in turn will give you other information and they'll give you other allies that you can speak to. I think the last point that I would just make is that, you know, look at all of us here in this space, in this room. There are so many caring and deeply engaged people right here. Find your person, find your couple of people, ask them to make introductions to people on campus in different departments. You can contact me. My contact information will be provided somewhere in here, and if not, I'll make sure that it is and that the hosts of the meeting have it. Please contact me, email me. I love talking to people about pursuing education. I especially love people who are interested in engaging with the criminal justice systems and working towards positive change. We are all committed to being part of your support system. Use us. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for your time and attention.
And that's what lightning looks like. Okay. And I've been the beneficiary of that for some time now. So thanks a lot, Becca. Really appreciate it. Over to you, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you. I see that there's not any questions.
Oops.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I see that I'm trying to unmute this. I just have one question. I know that 4 years ago, President Obama, and now I know that there's been conversations about community colleges being a resource, a vehicle where people can go to improve themselves in terms of their education. What efforts, both to you, Rebecca, and to Donnie, what are efforts being done in terms of engaging men, fathers, immigrant fathers, Black fathers, trying to encourage them to go back to school, get an associate's degree, learn a different skill, take advantage of the resources that are available to them in terms of higher learning, strengthening their education portfolio? Can you talk a little bit about what some of the efforts are in our area designed to engage fathers? And we just have we only have 5 minutes left in the program, so just talk briefly about what efforts are unfolding in our area.
Well, from the
I'll defer to Donnie. Yeah.
go ahead, Becca.
Sorry. No, I was gonna say I'm gonna defer to you because this is you.
Okay. So from the executive arm of Westchester Community College, we have outreach everywhere in the county. So our voice is stretched out all throughout the county. And on campus, and then by remote interaction, as the director of the Black Hispanic Male Initiative on campus, every single student that enrolls in WCC who identifies themselves as a male student of color, is automatically funneled into my program. So by virtue of that connection, as you can well imagine, the word of mouth gets out fairly quickly. And so what is encapsulated within our apparatus on campus and now via remote is that no one is ever left alone, like ever. The level of communication now spread electronically touches everyone who just pushes a button, just clicks a button. And so now the information is automatically funneled through them. Whereas if we were on campus, what I would traditionally be doing, like every Wednesday, is running a group for these individuals, along with the other different outreach mechanisms that we have. But the electronic one, I know now that they're receiving the information. Now, whether they want it or not, whether they need it or not, it is available to them. So it provides a level of equity, interestingly enough, now more than ever, just by that feature alone.
Thank you. I see that I'm looking at the time limit on our Zoom presentation today. We just have 3 minutes, and one is that I want to thank everyone for their participation, their contribution to today's session. I want to thank Reverend Dr. Franklin Richardson, the Commissioner of DSS, Kevin McGuire, Mayor Bartlett, Daniel Bonnet, and of course, Dr. Zwick, and all of our moderators, presenters. We want you to tune in on November 7th for our next session, which will bring our keynote speaker, Mr. James Rodriguez, as our keynote speaker. We thank you. We hope that this session has been informative and enlightening, that you have got something out of it. We're going to continue to address all of these issues related to our fathers. If you have comments, you can email me, fwilliams@whiteplainsny.gov, or reach out to our community partners. We're going to assimilate this information. We hope to file a report. But again, we thank you for participating. We thank you for your contribution. We thank everyone for their efforts trying to help our fathers engage in our community and live a healthy lifestyle. We have 2 minutes. Any other comments before we leave?
Can committee members stay behind for about 2 or 3 minutes?
I think it's just saying to me, Donna, we're going to close that. But why don't we meet Monday at 9 o'clock at our regular time?
All
If
right.
people don't mind, join me 9 o'clock, and we're going to review today's conference. Again, we thank everyone for their efforts, their contribution, and their time in today's session. You should be honored and pleased at the substance and quality of the presentations today.
Thank you. If we could remind people to fill out the valuations at I think there's something that's being sent, I believe. That would be
Yeah,
great.
it's in the chat. It's in the chat room, the evaluation. So please fill that out. Again, today's session is being recorded. We'll be posting that, and we thank all of you for tuning into today's Fatherhood Conference. So on behalf of our Fatherhood Conference Committee, New York State, we thank you and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday, November 7th at 10 o'clock a.m. Thank you. So again, please, there's a survey link there in our chat room. Please fill out the survey link. Thank you again and have a good day.
All right, thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Well, have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye-bye now.